I'm Dr. Peter Dittmar. I'm in the horticultural sciences here up in Gainesville. My specialty is in weed science of vegetable and deciduous fruit crops. And so let's go ahead and get started to talk about weed management in our brassica crops. So this is just a quick outline of what I'll be talking about today. The beginning of my presentation is going to focus on herbicides that are available. First looking at our head and stem, moving on to our leafy brassicas. And then after discussing herbicides, we'll talk about some of the systems management programs that we've done some research on, just so that way we can be managing our perennial weeds, especially nutsedge, so that way we can get not total weed management, at least management that we can control the weeds. So the first herbicide that I'm going to talk about is sulfentrazone. Sulfentrazone is a fairly old product, but they widened the labels for expanding it into vegetable crops. And this happened about 2 to 3 years ago. And so the first thing that I will say is that it is very important for you to consult the label for the sulfentrazone that you are using. And so the two examples that I have up there, now there's several different manufacturers who produce sulfentrazone, but I've only got two up here because these are the two extreme cases. The first one is Spartan FL 4F. Now, Spartan FL is registered only for cabbage transplant only. But then when you look at the next product, which is the same active ingredient, is sold as Willowwood Sulfin 4SC. And you can see that there's a lot more crops registered for Willowwood. So you've got a lot of the head and stem, the broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, kohlrabi, and then all of our leafy brassicas as well. You know, the bok choy, kale, collards. I'm missing a comma there. That's kale and collards, and mustard greens. So you can see that. Consult your label. And this is where I will say that, you know, even though Willowwood is registered in multiple crops, you cannot spray Spartan on crops that are not labeled. So even though even though the business that you are purchasing the pesticides from only has the other product, it's off label. So that's just my extensionist saying stay on label. Where this fits in really well. Oh, one of the other reasons you should consult your label is because some of them have different formulations. So for Spartan FL, you're going to use 12 fluid ounces per acre compared to the Sulfin 4SC is 2.25 to 3 fluid ounces per acre. So the Willowwood is just a little bit higher concentration, so you can use a lower rate. Where this fits in really well with our program is in the weeds that can be controlled, pigweeds, lamb's quarters, Florida pusley, sedges. All of the labels contain annual sedges. Some of the labels include yellow and purple. From the research that I've done in cabbage, some years we have really good control of nutsedge, and then other years we don't. We're still working out why there's some differences in our nutsedge control with sulfentrazone. And then there at the end is annual grasses are also included in all the labels for control. So one thing that I want to put here is in the sulfentrazone label, they list the specific crops and instead of crop groups. So I just wanted to take a brief second to talk about crop groups. So this presentation will be available later, so you don't have to get into into the details on this. I just want to show you that so all of our vegetable crops are put into various crop groups. So you'll see on that top line, we've got a group called the leafy greens subgroup. And so when we do pesticide registration, we can collect the residue and the tolerance data from the head lettuce and the leaf lettuce and the spinach. And so we can collect that residue data from those representative crops. So that way we can get everything that is in that group. Everything that's in this subgroup has a similar growth habit, similar production practices. And so this allows us to get products registered in a multitude of vegetable crops without having to do expensive residue studies on every single crop. And so that's the great thing, is that we can get a lot of pesticide registered for the variety of vegetable crops that we have. The downside to crop groups is that sometimes they'll register they'll register the whole group, or they'll register only part of the group. So you can see the herbicide label on the left, that's glyphosate for a pre-plant burn down. And so we can see that in cucurbits, we've got every single cucurbit listed there on the left, because they're willing to say we've got crop safety in all of these. But if we look at the prowl label that's on the right, we'll see that there are some concerns for crop tolerance. And so even though we've got the residue data for that entire crop group, we just haven't documented the crop safety yet. And so when we see in a herbicide label or all pesticide labels that we've got the entire crop group, then we can do that whole crop group. But sometimes they'll specify the exact crops, and this is because of crop tolerance or crop safety concerns. So that's sulfentrazone. The next label I want to talk about is one that's I'm hoping will be available for this growing season, but let's be honest, it's moving slow. And so most likely it will be ready for next season, but I just want to make you all aware of what's coming down the pipeline. Goaltender. So this is a proposed 24C state label. You probably have a very similar label in other states. There's like 18 other states that have the 24C label that we are pursuing. What this label will be is a goaltender at 4 to 6 fluid ounces 2 weeks after transplanting, or if you've got direct seeded head and stem brassicas, you need 4 true leaves, so that's direct seeded. And so I've got some data here that we did on farm and at the research center, looking at oxyfluorophane or goaltender pre-transplant the same day as transplanting. So we transplanted and then sprayed right over the top of them within 30 minutes of them going into the ground. 4 to 6 leaf stage, 6 to 10 leaf stage, and then what would it look like if we didn't treat it all? So if we look at 30 days after planting, so that second column, we can see that and this is lamb's quarters control. Sorry, so this is the control of the lamb's quarters. We can see that we got excellent control at transplanting and pre-transplanting, and it was very similar to the post. But what we get is, later in the season, we can see that 63 days after planting, we still have really good control from a post-transplant. And this is the worst of the 3 studies that we did. Now, when we look at cabbage injury, we can see that, later in the season, we do have quite a bit of injury when we sprayed it in the fall. So it's that second column there. We're looking at 7.5 on a scale of 100. So it's really minor, and all of that injury is occurring on the wrapper leaves. So this is the weed control study that we did. On the far left is the non-treated. So you can see all of the lamb's quarters that is popping up on the sides of the bed. There in the center is our pre-transplant application, and it's really hard to see it in the picture just because it's a green weed growing on a green crop. But those little red arrows are showing all of the lamb's quarters that has broken through just because it's later in the season. And then on the far right is the 4 to 6 leaf stage. And you can see, so we only sprayed that center row. So if you look on either side of that plot, you can see that we did have a really good stand of lamb's quarters in that field. So this is the goaltender injury that we saw. On the far left is the 4 to 6 leaf stage. You can see that the injury occurs as burning on the leaves, and so that early application is on those leaves that are going to probably fall off as the season goes along. And then on the right, this is the sort of injury that we saw on the leaves that are at 6 to 10. There is some concern about the delay of harvest. The 4 to 6 leaf stage caused a 3-day delay in harvest. So there was no difference in total yield and no difference in the head size, but that's because we harvested when they were at market weight. And so some plots had to be harvested that 3 to 4 days before or 3 to 4 days after the non-treated. So that's just something to be aware of when using goaltender post-emergence. So what I just showed were 2 products that are new to the Brassica group, sulfentrazone and oxyfluorophene. And even those AIs are not new active ingredients. They're just new to the crop. And a lot of that is just because there's not a lot of exploration in herbicides in vegetables. So one thing that we need to do for weed control is that we need to not only do weed control in the crop itself, but also do some weed control during the fallow period. And so the next 2 studies that I'm going to show you is weed management that we can do during the fallow period. So the first experiment is to look at a really long weed control fallow period. So this is 4 months. What we looked at is a cover crop using sun hemp, cowpea, sorghum, and sun hemp, cowpea, and sorghum Sudan grass. And then we were interested in knowing whether or not using S-metolachlor or dual at 1/3 of a pint would reduce the amount of weeds early in the season when your cover crop canopy hasn't completely closed yet, hoping to get that additional effect of a herbicide along with a cover crop. Then that 3rd treatment is glyphosate. That's a 24 fluid ounce glyphosate rate that we're using. And we did that twice using an 8-week interval for those 2 applications. And then using a non-treated weedy fallow. So no cover crop, no herbicides. So like I mentioned, this is a really long fallow period. We planted the cover crops on April 18th. We terminated the cover crop on August 18th. And then for this experiment, we used bok choy, which was planted in October and then harvested in December. So if we look at, so what we were most interested in was the control of nut sedge. We can see that our various cover crops are on the far left. Whether or not we used a herbicide in that fallow period. So we planted on April 18th. When we did an evaluation on June 17th, we didn't see any differences between our treatments. So we expected to see that early weed control from the herbicide, and we just didn't get it. By the time we mowed and then allowed the nutsedge to, we mowed and we allowed that cover crop to break down a little bit. And so we did see a really excellent effect in that our cover crops didn't control our purple nutsedge very well. So you can see that in the cover crops, we had anywhere from 41 to 50 nutsedge in 2 square feet. Compared to the 2 applications of glyphosate, we only had 2. And then once we planted and got halfway through the season with the bok choy, again, the best weed control that we got was from the 2 applications of glyphosate. So this is just a quick example of what we had for our cover crops. In the far left is the sorghum. We didn't do any sort of fertilizer, which in hindsight was a bad idea because you can see how yellow it is. The sun hemp and the cowpea are there in the center and in the lower right. Looking at some pictures, glyphosate is there on the left. And then on the right is the sorghum. What is a little hard to see in this picture is just that the sorghum, the nutsedge in the sorghum has gone to flower. So you can sort of see a purple tinge that is occurring in that field. And then some of the conclusions that we can come to, I know I'm coming up on time, so is we didn't get the sort of control that we wanted from the S-metolachlor. Some of that may be the fact that we waited. Our sorghum wasn't concept treated, so we weren't able to apply the same day as planting, so we had to delay our application. And so this is just showing that application timing is important for that weed control, because we've tried this study in other places and we've gotten better weed control with S-metolachlor at the time of planting. And then one of the other things is that our weed pressure was just so high that we couldn't get any yield differences in our nutsedge. You know, in our fields at the research center that we have in Citra, you know, we had 50 nutsedge in a square foot. So it's definitely worst case scenario. And so even in our non-treated, it didn't work really well. Okay, so I showed you the 8 months, or not 8 months, but 4 months was just way too long of a fallow period. So what can we do fallow period? So we looked at a non-treated again. What if we did nothing? Using a tine weeder, which is in the upper right-hand corner. Those tines are about 3/4 of an inch wide. The S tine is there in the center, and those tines are about 1.5 inches wide. Lower right-hand corner is a rotavator. And so those blades just tear up the nutsedge that's in the field. And then we also used a cover crop as well as, again, the glyphosate, 2 applications of glyphosate. So this is just how it looked. We cultivated the entire field at 0 weeks. Then the weekly cultivations, the biweekly applications. The glyphosate here was applied at 3 and 6. And then at 7 weeks, we mowed the entire field and then prepared for planting the bok choy. So this is our nutsedge counts. And so you can see at the very beginning of the fallow period, we had all of the treatments were similar. Once we got here to the 3 weeks, we can see that our non-treated is really, really high. But we are getting really good control from the tine weeder as well as the glyphosate. But this glyphosate is when we did the first application. So you can see that we have a large decrease. And by the time we do a second application, we're all the way down to less than 3 in a square foot, which is very similar to a rotavator and the S tine. The weeds just got too big for the tine weeder to do very well. So you can see that the tine weeder is way up here with the non-treated. So going into the bok choy, so this is the cash crop. Again, I'm just going to skip right to the 14 weeks at the very end of the season. You can see that that tine weeder, again, is even worse than our non-treated, but we still get really good control from a rotavator, an S-tine, and a glyphosate application. And you don't even have to do the rotavator every single week. You can just do it at a 14-week interval, which is really great because that nut sedge is able to emerge. You can use up that carbohydrate that is in that tuber, but that 2 weeks isn't enough for the nut sedge to produce daughter tubers and make the problem worse. Just some quick photos. This is 10 weeks after the initiation of the experiment. So this is 10 weeks. And then later in the season, you can see the 14 weeks. So this is about near harvest. I didn't cover the data for the broadleaf weeds just because of time, but you can see that it didn't work very well on broadleaf weeds. And that's my time. So I'll stick around. So if you want to put some questions in the chat, I can take them there.